We are live and we are recording and people are falling in. Cool. Good day, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Exciting conversation. Definitely an interesting and hot topic at the moment. Experimentation-led growth, or experimentation being the foundation of growth, test and learn approach, how it differs from CRO, and all the exciting stuff that sits around that. Today, I've got Jonny and Ben with me from Spiro. I think it's maybe just in order to quickly do a round of very brief introductions just for the sake of the audience on both sides. I'm Stefan, for those of you who don't know. I'm the head of marketing here at CXL. Big passion for helping marketers find the little pieces of the puzzle that allows us to reach targets and do what we have to do. And Jonny and Ben is part of the sister company, Spiro, which is the CRO agency. I guess that might change a little bit to the growth experimentation agency in the near future, but for now, still CRO. And I'll allow you guys to quickly give a brief intro. Ben, you first, and then Jonny, I guess.
Yeah, I guess, we 3 years ago, I would say we were a CRO agency. Within the last 3 years, I've tried to position us as an experimentation agency, now repositioning yet again into the growth experimentation. The move 3 years ago was a move to try to be a big fish in a small pond being experimentation. And this is the mechanics, the programmatic pieces of setting up and running, an A/B testing program, and that echo chamber of folks in industry, led by kind of the software, world, the Optimizely's of the, that kind of area. I think we're set up to be pretty well known there. And so now going into a bigger pond, which is this growth world. So this has, this is where we're going now, and what we're talking about primarily here today. So I've been leading some of those shifts in positioning as the CEO of Spiro. By the way, Stefan, I started at CXL, what used to be CXL Institute, what's now CXL. That's how I started my journey to get where I'm at today. Actually started, doing research and academic kind of stuff for CXL. Didn't work out. The courses ended up being kind of what worked out, but yeah, long-winded intro there by me.
Awesome. Welcome. And Jonny, I believe, is the newest one on the crew, but a very important addition.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Yeah, I'm Jonny Longden. I'm Chief Growth Officer at Spiro. It's week 3, so very new. But I've been in experimentation for a very long time, like since it was invented. And I've been backwards and forwards, client side, agency side, several times. So I've got quite a unique perspective of having been on the agency side. I've built agency teams from the ground up 3 times. And also been on the client side, most recently in a senior product role. So yeah, I've got quite a lot of perspective on the different ways that experimentation are used. But I'm really excited to be at Spiro. Like it's really my mission. It's always been my mission to try and change the way decision making is done in businesses, and to find the right sort of career moves to help me do that. And this is just the absolute perfect place that I can be, to do that and to help further that mission.
Cool. Awesome. Welcome to you as well. Yeah, I guess you guys are in the small pond. It is definitely getting more famous. Funny enough, I was sitting in a conversation earlier today with a CRM agency CEO in South Africa, in Cape Town. And he is very familiar with you guys. He told me, I used to work in the CRO space. You guys work closely with Ben and Spiro, and how's Winter doing? I was like, okay, well, that's you didn't always hear that in all the conversations, but cool. So guys, let's get over into the topics for the day. That's obviously why people are here. I think to start out, and this is also what the two of you have been posting about, if I've just kept an eye on LinkedIn for the last few days, is this concept where a lot of people, and I guess I can use the word misconception, that experimentation almost equals CRO. And to make that a little bit more extended, a lot of people kind of reserve this for this digital realm. Experimentation happens on websites or with ads, and that's almost where it stops, and that's where most of the conversation around it happens. Can you guys, just for the sake of the conversation, break down what is that actual difference and misconception between the CRO practice and the bit broader application of the experimentation on a business level, and within also just to gear the conversation in that direction, specifically marketing departments, that it's not just websites and ads, for instance?
I would just chime in here, Jonny. We both have probably a ton to speak on this. We've got our own, we've been talking about this a lot lately in terms of the positioning shift. So, just like CRO does not only equal A/B testing, I think that experimentation also does not only equal CRO, which is typically within this digital realm and websites and apps and things like that. There's a lot of platforming in terms of our roles. The SEO industry and the folks that are doing SEO are starting to merge with CROs and realizing the kind of overlap, the huge overlap in the Venn diagram of customer intent and what's on the page, that landing page experience, and the content that's there, and the quality that needs to be there in order to engage, and et cetera, and how valuable that is for SEO. Analogously, right, there's a big overlap of experimentation and CRO, but experimentation is a little bit more broader. It's a little bit more around bet taking and less optimization necessarily. Like CRO is a little bit more of optimization, tweaking, squeezing the juice of what's there. Of course, learning about customers, et cetera. Experimentation has to do with bet taking, and it can extend its tentacles and methodology to every surface area of a business. And I would make if you're familiar with product-led growth, the stuff that Marty Kagan's been in the product world, the stuff that Marty Kagan pushes quite a bit, very analogous to that. But again, the difference being it extends to every surface area of a business. And so you can do big bet taking around like sales processes and HR functions, and even like the CFO's got to be bought in, because the experimentation world and the way that I'm envisioning it is you need to think about yourself, whether you're in marketing or whether you're in product, you need to think of yourself almost like a venture capitalist. I've got a portfolio of bets. What am I investing in? What's going to be the next Uber? But in there, you have to realize that only 10% of your bets are going to win. And it's not only about, this idea of a split test, right? And the mechanics of that A/B test. It has to do more broadly. That methodology just stretches more broadly into those things.
Yeah, I would add to that, like you kind of think about the reality that a lot of businesses are in, and there's so many different setups for the way CRO and A/B testing works, but quite a common one is that you've got a CRO team within the business. And so if you look at that business, they might have marketing teams, engineering teams in product environments or whatever, and then they've got this CRO team like over here in the corner. And the CRO team are doing really careful testing about whether to move this button over here or whatever, and worrying about the statistics of it. But everybody else in the business is just doing stuff. So like the massive project to completely re-platform a website or launch into a new market or whatever. And it's like, why are you being really careful about experimentation in that little bit and not anywhere else? And it doesn't make any sense, because there's two aspects to experimentation. Like the business world has come to see it as the act of A/B testing, the act of running a controlled experiment, but that is only one little part of it. If you look at the science world, the act of experimentation, or the thing of experimentation, is just simply how do you test things and get some sort of evidence that it's working, and what's the best possible evidence that you can get. And that's literally all it is. So when we talk about experimentation, we mean, how do you take these big ideas, like how do we get a man on the moon, would be a big idea. And how do you figure out how to do it using a kind of an iterative process of trying things, getting some feedback on whether or not that's the right thing, and gradually, developing it and increasing it. So that's really what we're starting to talk about in terms of experimentation-led growth, is trying to reclaim the idea of experimentation from A/B testing software and broaden it out into this idea that you can develop and grow your business with this sort of scientific attitude, really. And that could put people off. It doesn't mean like, you're suddenly going to get loads of people in with white coats on. It's just simply about that, having that kind of critical way of thinking and curiosity, and trying to find evidence for things, basically.
Cool. I like the analogy of getting the guy on the moon. You can't just stick the guy in a rocket and assume that the rocket's going to work in the first attempt. There's a bunch of little things that you need to figure out before the rocket obviously goes.
Yeah, you start with a puppy. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. And the vast majority of CRO at the moment is the equivalent of, had NASA just gone, let's run some experiments on rocket propulsion in and of itself for no other reason. Do you know what I mean? Like that's it. It's like there's some people doing some very specific thing with a very specific tool on a very specific bit of the business without any wider context or connection to anything else. And that's really, what's happening in a lot of cases, and it doesn't make any sense. It might sell software tools and it might sell other things, but it doesn't actually make any sense.
I also think that there's a push and pull thing here. We're Jonny and I are on a mission here. We love this idea of experimentation, and we want to push it. It's a strategy and a strategic approach to grow, and we believe in it. But there's also a pull thing with AI coming down our throats. Like it or not, the cost of variations, like the cost of digital variations, like A, B, C, D, E, the cost of that creative is going down and down and down. Like it's going to be automatic. The text, the imagery, the layout, all of this, the cost to produce the variations is going to go down and down and down. So what do you do? So you need to shift over to testing different types of things, like not variations, variables, but sets of variables and models. Effectively, you have to go towards model testing. So you test different AIs, for example, that create those variations. You test different propensity models, recommendation engines, and things like this. And so this is where this idea represents that shift from optimization to experimentation in my mind as well. It's a bit of a spectrum, and I'm putting some kind of imprecise labels on these things, but you can see that shift and that idea of like push and pull as well. So
yeah, it's not with the advent of AI as well. It's not impossible to imagine that at some point AI will be able to real time write and render the code of a website for each individual user. Because the challenge has always been responsive website and things like that, but if the site is not just rendering existing code, but it's actually rewriting the code for an individual user based on learning and stuff like that, which is not, we're there yet, but it's not impossible to imagine that. And that's just a good analogy for the way it's going. Like optimization is going to be automated in the same way that it is now for PPC and things like that, with smart bidding. So, there's going to be less and less need for human intervention in optimization. But also, it's not that interesting anyway, really. I mean, it has a really significant financial benefit to a lot of companies. A lot of companies can make a really serious amount of revenue growth off of optimization. However, when push comes to shove, it's not necessarily going to further your business or make you stand out in a new market or anything like that. It's not going to suddenly take you from here to here in terms of innovation. It's, it's doing something quite functional.
I think optimization still is going to have its place. Let me give you an anecdote from Netflix, for example. Like the head of experimentation platform at Netflix is going to speak this next year at EXL here in Austin. He gave a talk at Code, the MIT Code conference. We were talking a little bit about their thresholds of like p-value that they're dealing with right now, and they were doing a lot of causal work, a lot of hypothesis testing, and kind of cranking up their alpha level and their risk for the type 1 error, right? And they eventually got to a point where instead of 0.05, they realized that shoot, it should be at 0.5, and this should blow people's minds. I think their acceptance criteria of whether to, ship something went to like just the probability of flipping a coin. But what that represents is a shift from where you think the risk is. Like, do you think it is false positives, or do you think it's false negatives? So this idea of like A/B testing and being really clear on what's working and what's not, and the hypothesis testing when you're optimizing, I think that needs to shift as well. And we need to start thinking about running a lot faster with that optimization work as, again, creative, it gets cheaper and cheaper. What's work, like, we're not going to do no harm. Let's just put this forward, and let's get on to these bigger bets that actually mean something. And so that's a little bit of a weird thing. But Stephen, I might show some data on this too, real quick. Do you mind if I share my screen?
Yeah, go for it. Just one while you're sharing, just a thought that I just quickly want to roll back. Jonny, like you mentioned, obviously in big companies, there's the CRO teams that get to, sit and very carefully test things in the corner. But in reality, there's obviously a lot of companies, majority actually, that don't have CRO teams, that might have one individual that is actually currently setting testing quite a bit, or at least someone in data that is actively sitting on that. But smaller kind of startups and scale-ups, especially now with AI almost replacing teams, like, and if we look at marketing domain, teams are shrinking. There's like less people need to do more. And there's a lot of companies and teams that don't necessarily have that dedicated function of someone actually doing CRO. And I think this becomes very important, because that shift in mindset from CRO, and if I don't have someone who's specifically doing CRO, I technically don't do CRO, to growth experimentation can work for it's supposed to work for the smaller model as well. It's that mindset that should be adopted by the smaller team to actually run those bets and figure out what's working, because it could actually be more influential and more impactful to the smaller company running these experiments on an ongoing matter than for the big company that just has this person or an entire department or like multiple teams running experiments in isolation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, again, it comes down to that idea that CRO has been sort of almost pigeonholed alongside this thing of A/B testing, and it doesn't need to be like that. Like, really, a small company should be thinking, what are we trying to achieve? What are the kind of theories that we have about how we might achieve that? How do we test these things? And testing is just, how do we try something, and what's the best kind of evidence and feedback we can get back for it? And is shifting to that mentality takes you out of that idea of let's do some CRO and have a CRO person over here. However, that doesn't mean that CRO in its traditional guise isn't also relevant for them. Like, they could decide, actually, we need to really optimize the hell out of the user experience on the site. So I'll let Ben get back to his data.
I mean, I think that what you guys are talking about is exactly what I teed up here, this visual on the rise of this growth role in our industry. And you don't see kind of CRO on the right there. You see product owner, you see product manager there, but it's the rise of this growth role that, Stephen, I think that you kind of contextualized it really well, of like, startups, and, we don't have this dedicated role that you might have in a larger team. How do you contextualize this shift and the difference between, A/B testing, CRO, and experimentation? I think this rise of the growth role is a proof that this is the shift that we're talking about. And to get more specific about it, and I'll share this, we can share this with the registrants a little bit. There's this article that was now a couple years old, written by Guillaume Cabane over at Ramp, and he was ex-CMO at Segment and Drift, and now runs this consultancy of Hypergrowth Partners. He talks about the specific activity here of what I'm labeling as growth experimentation, but he sets it up as these growth pods, and you can set it up from the acquisition side, or you can set it up from the product side. But this article goes into like this 3-step process for what this means, and best I can find it, this is the way that these modern companies are growing, is through this, again, my label, growth experimentation. Ramp, by the way, one of the fastest growing startups ever. I think 100 million ARR within like a year or two. Bring on marketers that operate as economists. This is that growth role that we just saw the data on. Constantly question and measure your experiments. We all know this kind of setup here. This is kind of what we live in day to day. But the way that you're structuring your team, the way that you're taking a startup approach, he even kind of refers to like the framework and that the importance of that angel investor mindset. And so again, I'll send this article around to everybody, but I think it's a kind of a cool one to think about. So I'm gonna stop sharing there first. I think that's how I stop sharing.
Cool, yeah, I'll put that into the summary that we send out. Yeah, so it's this, like a few years ago, there was obviously I'm personally not the biggest fan of the term, but the growth hacking. This is where it kind of started. Like, we all need this head of growth. Someone needs to come in and drive growth. And like, basically the gist of that was come up with a list of bets, as you put it earlier, and start testing these.
There's a midwit meme here, I think. It's like the product, growth hacking, and then like we got kind of scientific as an industry. And then maybe we're rolling down the hill of complexity and we're simplifying it, but we're going back to those days of what that might mean, relabeling it, and
yeah, it's like this. Like the need for, like, everyone needs to be in the growth mindset is getting more. It's getting less growth hacking, more like of less we. Like, there's that single person that needs to, like, man this to, can everyone start thinking like this, please? Again, which is like, it's a shift that I like seeing from just my experience of like building marketing teams at startups over the past few years. I come in as the first person, like, things need to happen. We need to get people. There's a bunch of guesses on the table. Oftentimes hierarchy is, hey, we've got this great idea, we need to build this, or why don't we just launch this thing, and this will help the company grow. And then 6 months down the line, you look at it and it's like, it's a hell of a lot of time and money that went into this thing, and it's not really working. Did anyone mind to actually look at the data before this, or was this just like an idea that we wanted to push out the door and see where this goes? And I guess that with the world moving as fast as it does at the moment, there's less room for that era. Like, funding is not as available as it was. AI is completely changing the game. You can't just sit and guess and think things are going to work, and then, like, if you don't get lucky, wonder like, hey, how did we get here? And I guess that is where that comes from. Like, you need that mindset in the company. And that's also why a lot of people who are doing it correctly is investing in that growth role, or growth pods, or like more the wider, like, application of this within the organizations.
I think with startups, it's easy. It's smaller loops, adaptation. It's in larger companies where it's really hard. Sorry, Jonny, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, like, the thing that's always interested me is that the book, The Lean Startup, which is like an immensely popular book, like a lot of people have read that. It kind of articulates what we're talking about really well. It's but at the level of a startup, which is simply that you have to try things, evaluate, pivot, all that kind of stuff. But the interesting thing is twofold. One, it doesn't actually tell you how to do that. Like, it just says you should try stuff. It doesn't actually give you any kind of guidance on how you make those decisions, or how you get that feedback, or like the process for doing it. But the other thing is that it really doesn't need to be at the startup level. Like, that principle is exactly what we're talking about. So I guess, like, in a way, what we're trying to do is kind of take that concept and do those two things. Like, how can that work at any level of organization? And how do you do it? Like, practically, how do you do it? Like, how do you have systems that allow you to track everything, and how do you make those decisions, and all that sort of stuff?
Cool. So I guess that almost then basically takes us over to the next topic of conversation. Like, we now understand that the CRO and experimentation are two, like, CRO still has its place within the model. It's just, it's not either or. You need to, at the end of the day, have both of them. So on that practical step of where we're talking, product-led versus what you guys are now pushing is this experimentation-led, what does that model start looking like in practice? Like to your point now, Jonny, like what is that framework? Like obviously this is a much longer conversation to really, get this over, but how do we like equip the people who's listening and is going to watch this afterwards to get into that mindset, number one? And like what does it look like in practice when you really start doing this at different levels?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like this starting point, and I've had this conversation with businesses many times, and I've helped some very big businesses with answer this question. And the starting point is what we would call operating system, which is to some extent a kind of project management tool that allows you to manage all of this process and information. But an operating system is not just that, it's also the frameworks and ways of doing things, and even to some extent the mental models that go with it. Because ultimately innovation is a kind of sort of sausage factory, really. You're always going to be, you need to have goals, you need to map those goals, you need to come up with ideas, and you need to progress those ideas through different stages of development. And some of them will work and some of them won't, and the ones that do work you want to get gradually more and more involved with, and the ones that don't you want to kind of learn from and develop new things. And that is a system and it's a process. And people talk about a culture of experimentation, which is great, but you won't get very far unless you've actually got some kind of system and way of doing things. And that's really what I'm talking about that's missing from that lean startup. Is like a lot of people would go like, this is a great idea, but then have no understanding of how to do it. So I think the starting point is that sort of operating system. And again, that shifts the onus of kind of the area of investigation from how do you run a test and the p-values on it to what's all the process that goes around it. And if you have an idea that you want to activate and try, it doesn't really necessarily matter whether it's an A/B test and whether you get some statistics. If you've got it all in the system, you're kind of in this process of learning and mapping everything and tracking and stuff like that. So I think that's the starting point for me. And there's a lot of other stuff that has to go around that, but that's where I come up from it from.
Yeah, I can get quite tactical on it. I mean, test, measure, learn, talking about like lean startup, that's an operating system. The question is how do you overlay it onto an org chart, especially a big org chart, a big complicated org chart. And is that org chart, which is the way an organization communicates, it's the way that they ship work, it's the way that they develop product, et cetera, right? And so how do you, again, overlay, test, measure, learn on top of that, or OKRs, or, assess, plan, act, which is more of on a project management level, language level. Effectively, how do you run those small loops, and how do you keep them small and not have these giant waterfall projects that are at risk of you're not learning fast enough because your competitors will learn faster, right, Stephen? You alluded to that. Tactically, I think there's two primary ingredients. The operating system artifact, which that is your learning mechanism, your knowledge management system. It's what connects the dots on the efforts, the bets that you're taking. It's your portfolio of bets and whatever that represents, whether it's in Jira or Monday or Airtable or your data warehouse, whatever that kind of represents. You need to have that very tactically, that artifact. And then there's the ritual. Everything comes down to artifacts and rituals with regards to operating systems and getting tactical with it, how exactly it overlays onto an org chart. And so there's that artifact, and then the ritual. In my mind, I'm really starting this last year to push on a bigger version of an ideation session or ideation workshop. It's much more explicit to develop roadmaps and run them and learn from them. So it's the actual loop and the representation of bringing that cross-functional team together, the people with responsibility and authority to make the changes, right? And so not just the people that are responsible without authority. And so anyway, you own the problem, you think about your portfolio of bets, you rank, prioritize, you roadmap them, you run the roadmap, and you come back to that, you loop back to that roadmap and say, what have you done? And so whether that's every 6 weeks, like Shopify does that, whether that's quarterly, like a ton of organizations do, you're coming back and holding yourself accountable. There was a great podcast recently, like how Shopify runs their culture on Lenny's podcast that goes into this. They run it every 6 weeks, right? The article that I just sent you from Ramp, he runs on 2-week sprints of these things. Like, what bets are we taking? Let's run these bets. In 2 weeks, we're going to come back and see and hold ourselves accountable for these bet taking. So there's a ritual, but then there's the artifact on where are you running that kind of thing. Like, where are you keeping track of your bets and your investments and stuff and things like that. So that tactically, I think, is the way that you represent that lean startup methodology.
I think I think as well, from my experience, it's just so overlooked as well. I mean, even you've probably got some quite advanced product-oriented organizations with, like, big product engineering environments, and everybody's using Jira, but and even maybe things like product board or whatever, but those are really just places for individual people to shove lists of stuff. And so everybody's got separate lists of things.
It could be that could be anything really. Like for the organization, it's about having that home base where everything is together and is accessible for everyone to work from. It's the ritual.
And what they haven't done is think about it from a data point of view, like Jira or whatever. Those things, like that's data, and it needs to be meaningful. It needs to make sense. It needs to give central peoples a consistent view of what's happening. It needs to give people the ability to reference other things and to ladder things up to goals and stuff. And I think like that just doesn't get thought about enough at all, even at that level. So yeah, it's it's the thinking. It's not just the system itself, whether it's Airtable or whatever. It's the thinking that goes into it and what it means for like how the business is going to operate off the back of it.
Cool, thank you. I really like the ritual artifact way of describing this, because that makes it practical. Which, Jonny, also to your last point there, I think the next thing that I want to ask is, what is the, like, in theory, once again, talking about this, it seems like, hey, anyone can do this, but it's not. If it was that easy, everyone would be doing it. What is according to you guys, from where you're sitting right now, obviously trying to push this into more organizations and to push this into the world, what is the biggest pitfalls almost, or the biggest hurdles that you encounter? And I know you guys obviously work with bigger companies, which is where you should already at least have decent systems in place where you can run these things. What are the hurdles that companies are running into that you're observing in the market at the moment?
I mean, the biggest in my mind, Jonny, data fragmentation. I mean, there's so many. I think, Jonny and I are working for a professional services organization, right? Like we're thinking, we constantly are in rituals and stuff, but we work alongside this massive machine of technology, this industry of MarTech, right? CDPs and A/B testing tools and all this software. And I think that data fragmentation is like one of the bigger hurdles, and that leads to like language fragmentation. When you want to get a group together and run small loops and communicate accountability, like we did this and we got this, and so we're going to do this next, etc. The human-to-human communication language thing is a big issue. And when you don't trust your data, when you have different definitions of users, this is like holds back that communication efficiency. So to me, that's the bullseye of like where we are as an industry to tackle and where the big issues are.
I think the other thing is the general understanding of all of these different types of things, and people's perceptions of it. So CRO comes from a long sort of quite strange history, going back to a world where you had consultants selling no win, no fee type deals of like, I'll come and do this stuff to your website, and I'll pay, you can pay me on a commission basis for whatever like wins and stuff like that. So all of that history has developed this kind of strange thing that is CRO that it can be successful for people, but it's quite odd. And a lot of people, like the people that you really need to engage at senior levels, will have these perceptions of it that they maybe don't really question, that they've just picked up over years. So like they might have worked in a company a couple of years ago where there was a CRO team, and without really ever sort of thinking about it, that creates their perception of what experimentation is and all that sort of stuff. And then on top of that, you've got a lot of kind of quite weird semantic confusion. I mean, we're talking about that on this call, of the difference between CRO and experimentation and things like that. And this, it's a lot of it is all referring to what is ultimately the same thing at base, but different people think of it in different ways and they have different words for it and stuff like that. So it's quite hard to get under the skin of that, and it's quite hard to converse with people about it when people have such wildly different perceptions from the way they've come from and things like that. So there's no easy fix to that, but that is a big challenge with any of this stuff.
Cool. So then my next big question is, I guess, if someone's sitting here now thinking, how cool, I like this, I get it. How do I go back to the team, to the leadership team, or to the boss, or even if you're on the leadership team and this, you need to convince the others around you, your peers, how do you champion this mindset that, this is what you guys are obviously trying to achieve at this moment. So, you probably don't have the immediate answer for the longer term, yeah. But for like the last conversation here, we've got 9 minutes left. What does that look like? How do you go back? Where do you start if nothing's in place? If something's in place, what are like the key things that you need to address? What are the conversations you need to open? Ben, to your post the other day, which I also wrote the previous newsletter about, there's 10 points I thought was very nice, especially if there's do you really have a growth culture? And we just mentioned it now. It's one thing having a growth culture, but it's another thing like executing a growth culture, or a experimentation culture. Sorry, not a growth culture. What does that look like if you want to champion this and start embedding this into even just your team, not necessarily the entire organization, because you obviously have to start a little bit smaller sometimes. How do we champion this?
My mind goes to like maybe a bottom up approach and a top down approach. The bottom up approach is start doing those small data to action loops somehow, some way. Get your team from a grassroots level, wherever your touch point is, whatever experience that you own. Think about the core problems. You get the team together to think about a series of bets. Hopefully you've got a financial model. If not, maybe do some napkin math and build one to opportunity size those bets, create a roadmap, run it, come back, hold yourself accountable, start running those loops at the most 3-month loops. That's at the grassroots level. Start to run those things faster and faster and faster, and you'll see some dividends. From the top down, I think it's a matter of getting leadership to hand down quality problems to teams. Now, a lot of product management, a lot of product folks call themselves product managers, and they're actually project managers, and that's because the leadership team are handing down roadmaps. They're not handing down customer problems for those teams to solve themselves, because they don't trust that they'll do it, and for a variety of different reasons. And so there's a minority of cultures that truly run a product operating model and operate that way. So from a top-down perspective, how can leadership act more like coaches and less like managers, act more like leaders and less like managers? And what are the quality customer problems and opportunities that the organization is solving? If you ask a set of 5 leaders in your company, what are the top 3 customer problems, do they all say the same thing, right? So start asking questions like that. Start demanding, quality problems to be passed down from the top. That seems kind of I don't know, vague and ambiguous, but I do see the crux of like that culture being a paradigm shift of leadership transitioning from management into actual leadership, which has more to do with coaching and enablement and less to do with dictation. That's where my mind goes on your questions.
I like that. Just before Jonny, I know you also want to jump in there. I like that because it's almost an idea of, like, to make it very basic, is let the team figure this out. I guess that sits at the core of experimentation is figuring things out. And if you allow people to like solve a problem, but come with like, how do you figure this out? You do pass that torch, and you do allow that to happen. Obviously, you need to be open to what comes back, which comes with that doing that. But yeah, let people figure it out.
I would add to that as well. Don't wait to be given the permission to do that. So, you know, like if you're in a CRO team that's doing optimization, and you hear your CEO say, "Oh, we're thinking of whether we should launch into another market, or we're thinking of like how we kind of go after this new segment of customers," just latch onto those things and find ways to test things that help answer those questions, or to gather data that helps answer those questions. And then you can go and say, look, we've done this, it helps with that problem. And, you know, so don't wait to be given the permission or to be asked to do things. Just go and do it, and you know, find ways to do it, and go, look, this is what it can do. And the more you can demonstrate the value of this way of thinking that we're talking about, then the more people will sit up and recognize, hey, here's some guys did this with very little money, and we're getting information that we need, we're learning, you know. So,
and you know, while you know, to the audience here, while everyone waits for the book that Jonny and I are going to write on this to come out, you know, read Marty Kagan's product operating model, the book Transformed, that provides a bit of a recipe, and it's through a little bit different of a language lens, but you know, view it through the experimentation lens. Read that book, and you'll have some of the ingredients and some of the tactical strategies to move forward with it. I would just make also an argument here that what we're talking about too, there's a moral case for this way of working as well. It's more, it fits with the more of a modern way that we're all working, of more accountability, smaller, more adaptive loops. We're moving out of the age of industrialization where we're all cogs in the machine. You know, just ship your, you know, just do your link building, just ship your campaign. Like, you don't need the context of the broader org. You know, we're not wanting to live in that world. We're not wanting to be cogs in the machine. Less and less we are, right? We're needing autonomy and accountability. And so this is more of a moral way, you know, of working as well. I mean, there's a moral case for this way of working, but it's a double-edged sword. It comes with accountability. You need to know the outcomes of your outputs, right? You're not judged only on your outputs anymore, also the outcomes. So I'll get off my soapbox there, but.
Well, I do want to add there that I think it's important to mention that a win is not always necessarily in the form of a gain. It could be avoiding a loss as well. Like, proving that something doesn't work is also progress. Avoiding spending copious amount of resources on something that's clearly not going to work is also a win. So, yeah, I completely agree. I like the moral angle on that as well. And yeah, Jonny, you have something additional there? I see it in your.
No.
Oh yeah, so I thought you were jumping for your mic. Cool, guys. I think that's pretty much that, and that's a wrap. Cool. I'll be sure to add those books and the links, Ben, that you mentioned to sending the summary. I'll just check up with you on just to get that list as well. For everyone who joined, thank you very much. The ones who's looking at this afterwards, hope you find value in it. We'll probably have more follow-up conversations about this in the future as well. Definitely an interesting topic, and one that I like to see unfold. And obviously here at CXL, we're also pushing in that direction. Experimentation is at the core of what we're teaching. So yeah, thank you, Ben. Thank you, Jonny, for sharing your insights and your time with us today. And I hope everyone has a great day and a good week further. Cool.
Yeah. Thanks, Stefan.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.